Greetings, welcome to the show. This is the overview, and I'm your host, Brother Mbogo. Continuing with the theme around technocracy, this concept or idea of technocracy and how it's been incorporated into contemporary society, particularly Western societies. Today I'll be looking at the political systems. I've looked at the food industry. I've looked at the carbon currency or carbon credit. And the first program on technocracy I think I did was just an overall view of what technocracy is and the different areas it covered. So I'm basically looking at the different areas in more detail over the few programs I've done and I'll be doing. So today I'm looking at the political structure of this thing called technocracy and the structure that was introduced when they formed an organization in the 1930s. Called Technocracy Incorporated, and now those political ideas have been adopted into contemporary programs, even by the United Nations, in fact. So looking at basic concepts behind this technocratic political way of thinking, this is taken from a paper, Technocracy, the rule of expertise in the modern world. It's a graduate school paper by a scholar. The philosophical roots of technocracy can also be traced back to Plato's concept of philosopher king. As articulated in his work, The Republic, Plato posited that the ideal ruler should possess both wisdom and knowledge, using their expertise to govern for the common good. Well, the idea that a leader is supposed to have some expertise, well, he's supposed to have some expertise or an idea about to run a country, to be selected as leader or voted as leader. Even though technocracy is not about voting for people, it's about appointing the people they deem to be the best person to make certain decisions. Anyway, this notion resonated with technocrats who argued that engineers and scientists equipped with specialized knowledge should take on leadership roles in society to implement rational and efficient policies. Let me continue, then I'll make some comments. Technocrats critiqued capitalism for its inefficiencies and its tendency to prioritize profit over social welfare. They argued that the capitalist system was ill-equipped to address the complexities of modern economies, as it often led to overproduction, underconsumption, and economic inequality. But even from what I've read about these technocrats in their decision making, in order to seek more efficient ways of doing things, even in terms of manufacturing and production, what you'll find out is that technocrats will employ the least amount of people. So in order to produce something more efficiently or cheaply, you're going to use less stuff than you would probably normally use in a production process. So whether technocracy as a concept of efficiency is going to help deal with the employment issue is also questionable. Anyway, continuing. Technocracy proposed a more systematic and rational approach to economic management, emphasizing the need for experts to guide production and distribution processes. As I was says, if you become a technocrat or somebody's looking to make a process more efficient, then obviously you're going to look to employ as little staff as possible in terms of saving money in the production process. And also I'll maybe talk about later about how this new automation and AI is part of this idea of becoming more efficient. And in the future, what you'll find is, as these technologies develop, as AI improves and robotics and automation improves, it was obvious that they're going to be using less manpower. So more people will be out of work. How they'll deal with the issue of having more people out of work in this technocratic understanding is something that is going to be a problem going forward. Anyway, these are some of the political ideologies that contrast with technocracy. In contrast, socialism advocates for collective ownership of the means of production and an emphasis on social welfare. Socialists argue that wealth should be distributed more equitably to reduce disparities between the rich and the poor. So saying here that technocracy differed from socialism in its approach to governance. While socialists sought to redistribute wealth through political means, technocrats emphasize the role of technical expertise in managing resources. Having technical expertise in managing the resources doesn't necessarily mean that the wealth will be distributed. They'll be focusing more on how to tackle the use of the resources rather than looking at the issues that you have around people and the societies that you're supposedly managing. So anyway, technocrats believe that by adopting scientific approach to economic management, society could transcend the limitations of both capitalism and socialism. Well, there are a lot of technocrats in societies today, but you still find employment. Well, there are issues around employment and unemployment in today's world, in particular in Western countries, where the fact that they're teaching subjects in universities which don't apply or can't be used in any kind of industry. They're teaching strange ideologies to do with transgender and such things which don't really apply in the workplace. Anyway, let me continue. That's a brief look at contrasting the concept of technocracy with other political ideas. I'm going to look now at the 1930s organization, Technocracy Inc., or Technocracy Incorporated. It was formed by certain technocrats like Mr. Ubert, M. King Ubert. He's one of the co-founders of Technocracy. Anyway, let's look at their political structure or societal structure that they wanted to incorporate. In America, government has traditionally been based on geographical boundaries. A city has city limits, a county has county line, and a state has borders. Within these geographical limits, the citizens exercise political autonomy to create whatever kind of life they want to enjoy. Each grouping of citizens must determine how to best run its own infrastructure, education, healthcare, social. That's each state, I should think, if you're talking about the US, or each city. But then again, you have national policies towards some of these education, healthcare, and so forth as well. But yes, technocracy is looking at it differently. Technocracy turns this concept on its head by dissolving sovereign borders while calling for a system of governance based on functional sequence that removes a segment of responsibility from the lower political entity and awards it to the higher. So to an engineer like M. King Ubert, this was a perfectly natural and efficient way of viewing the technet, or the individual unit of technocracy that contains citizens. So according to him, the basic unit of this organization is the functional sequence. And this functional sequence is one of the larger industrial or social units. As I'll explain in a while, these functional sequence have different departments. This is the type of organization that they built in the 1930s, and they've taken certain ideas from this political structure to try and incorporate it into today's politics. The basic unit of this organization is from the functional sequence, is Technocracy study course, which they developed in the 1930s. This is what the organization developed. So the basic unit of this organization is the functional sequence, and this sequence is one of the larger industrial service units, the various parts of which are related to one another in a direct functional sequence. So you have the industrial sequences, and under this you have transportation, that's the railways, waterways, airways, and so forth. Communication sequence, which is part of the industrial sequence. Communication, that's the mail, telephone, telegraph. This was back in the 1930s. Then you have agriculture, farming, ranching, dairying, and so forth. And the major industrial units such as textiles, iron and steel and so all industries, all areas of society have their so-called sequence formations. Then you have service sequences like education, public health, which is medicine, public hygiene and so forth. So these are the, I'll explain what the functional sequence is in a minute properly, but that's how their structure was based. So he envisioned the appointed head of each functional sequence as belonging to a continental board of directors, which would be headed by, so all of this would replace the state governors, the senators and so forth that you have in this current political system. So under their system you have people, all of these people have board of directors and so forth, and the continental director. These are all appointed people, not people who are elected to office. So for each of these functions there would be no democratic discussion or vote, because the engineering expert in charge knows best how to run things by applying logic and efficiency. So the so-called experts and people who are supposedly know the best way to run a system are the ones who would appoint the heads of departments or heads of cities and heads of states and so forth. Then you have the continental director. He's the director of the continent, is more or less the president of the country, of the continent. He's the chief executive of the entire social mechanism. On his immediate staff are the directors of the armed forces, the foreign relations. These are different sequences: foreign relations, continental research, social relations, and area control. So it sounds like a very technical way to run a system. But you can't say it's not, that hasn't been adopted fully. There are certain technocratic ideas which have been adopted in the current era. And I'll explain in a minute what has been adopted. In fact, I'll explain now. It's talking about Bill Clinton and an executive order that he signed back in 1993, September the 11th, 1993. It formalized the National Performance Review, which was headed by Al Gore. And it was renamed the National Partnership for Reinventing Government. And the intellectual work that brought Clinton and Gore to take action was a book entitled Reinventing Government by Osborne and Gabler. Both of these guys, the authors of the book, are technocrats who are supposedly in search of pragmatic answers. Reinventing Government, they write, addresses how governments work, not what governments do. So technocracy basically is based around how governments work, not what they do. It's not based on laws, basically. So you don't operate on the basis of set laws. What the government does or decisions are made based on the best way to do things and how the best way to operate, basically. So you create regulations rather than go by the fixed laws or the fixed constitution of a country. The technocrats would sit down and decide. The same way a company operates, basically. A company management or board of directors or management would decide on ideas, on ways to run a company or new policies that they want to develop for the company to run better. And then that implementation will follow down the line to the ordinary workers. Anyway. The newly reinvented system of government puts its emphasis on implementing regulations rather than enforcing laws. If legal obstacles are encountered, the organization is empowered to take whatever pragmatic approach they can devise to skirt the law in favor of this regulation. This is like what's happening with the US government at the moment, with this current president coming in and doing things his own way and drafting executive orders to have certain things done, even though they go contrary to the law. That's why some of his policies are things that he's trying to bring in when it goes to the Supreme Court they disagree with him and they cancel his basically cancel his executive orders. But this is a form of technocratic thinking where he brought in, for example, Elon Musk, a business person, to supposedly make the government more efficient. So they fire a lot of people. They're not looking at how the structure and the laws of the American Constitution, but they're looking at the best way of doing things. So they may even break laws in order to achieve whatever goal they want to achieve. If empowerment means pragmatism, which it does, then it fits perfectly with other technocratic goals that Clinton expressed. So they're looking at things pragmatically, not in terms of the laws of what you can and cannot do. As I said, he could end up breaking certain laws just to achieve a particular goal. Yet the laws are set for a particular reason. You want a society to operate a certain way, or be run within certain guidelines. But technocrats, it will seem, are not looking at those guidelines. What they're looking at is the best way to get things done. And if you look at, for example, as they have combined technocratic thinking with this new climate change idea around carbon dioxide and the reduction of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the fact that they're looking at food production and agriculture, for example, and looking at ways of making that process more efficient by taking food production out of the fields and into the laboratory. Now you're talking about lab-grown meats and so forth, which I talked about already. But that's one of the results of this technocratic thinking that they want to bring in. Then you have the 15-minute cities and all those other issues. Essentially, the goal of reinventing government was to convert from a bureaucratic to a business model of governance. Our goal is to make the entire federal government less expensive and more efficient, and to change the culture of our national bureaucracy away from complacency and entitlement towards initiative and empowerment. The first three, cutting expenses, improving efficiency, and encouraging initiatives, can be seen as the typical mantra of technocracy, but empowerment needs some explanation. So here you hear them talking about improving efficiency, and which is one of the main things that this Doge group or whatever structure that is set up at the beginning of this second term for Trump to make the government more efficient. This is part of the technocratic thinking of making the government run more efficient and paying less attention to laws, as I said, and bring in. But it's also, if you look at the fact that someone like Elon Musk was there and all these tech titans were at Trump's inauguration, I think it was his inauguration, that it's combining governance with business and running government more as a business than a political structure. So their focus is less on political ideology and the laws of the land and how the society should be, and they're moving more towards running society more efficiently. Even if it means people are going to lose out to a certain extent. That's the way the world is going, or particularly the Western world is going, in terms of having machines and artificial intelligence taking over a lot of the work or the jobs in the future. It will become more efficient, but it will have less for people to do. So people will be less involved in the running of the society, in a sense. And they're even talking about using AI to manage society. This is the furthest extreme of this technocracy idea, in terms of having things running more efficient. You're now turning to AI, artificial intelligence, to lead that new form of efficiency, where AI now operates with automation and all these new scientific ideas such as gene technology, producing food in a laboratory and so forth, and 15-minute cities restricting people's movements in order to cut back on carbon dioxide production in society, reducing the size of cars, cutting down on flights, reducing the number of flights, air travel, So that is technocracy, and how it has been incorporated. I haven't mentioned the UN yet. I think now Clinton's program was so impressive that by 1999 it was picked up by the United Nations as a global program under the auspices of the UN Public Administration Program. That's the UNPAP. In a document entitled the Global Forum on Reinventing Government, the UN described what happened as follows. The Global Forum was first organized by the government of the United States in 1999. Since then it has emerged as one of the most significant global events to address government reinvention. Subsequent forums have been organized by the government of Brazil, Italy, Morocco, Mexico, and the Republic of Korea, respectively. And during the 6th Global Forum held in Seoul in May 2005, the United Nations Under Secretary General invited participants to the 7th Global Forum to be held at the United Nations headquarters. So the idea of this technocratic idea of government efficiency has been adopted by the UN, which means other countries around the world have adopted it. So it's become an international or a global program to technocratize how governments are run around the world. And if the US is using it, you might find that in many countries, well, it's being promoted by the UN basically, so countries will adopt it. How it will affect their societies, we'll have to see, especially those countries that are more technologically developed. You'll find that unemployment will increase in those countries over the next 10 or 20 years as they adopt the use of AI and automation in their societies more. So anyway, that was a brief look at this technocracy thing. I'm continuing, there's a couple of more things that I want to look at here. These are some of the financial supporters of this Alliance for Redesigning Government, which is a non-profit NGO that was founded to create a learning network of change agents in government at all levels for the express purpose of reinventing government or bringing in this technocratic idea. IBM partnered with this organization to provide technology for a comprehensive distance learning system that would distribute volumes of information to every corner of the nation. And these financial supporters include Anderson Consulting, AT&T, General Electric, Goldman Sachs, IBM, Ninex, Xerox. Then you had philanthropic donations poured in from Arco Foundation, Aspen Institute, Carnegie Corporation, Ford Foundation, many, Pew Charitable Trust, the Rockefeller Foundation, and so forth. So it's a Western project to change the way the world is run. And if the countries around the world adopt this technocratic idea, it will be much easier for them to bring in their technological way of running the world. Particularly in the West, I don't know whether global South countries will really accept this way of thinking or this form of governance. But that is their program. It is not a stretch to correlate Ubert's vision to modern implementation of functional sequences such as healthcare. So some of these policies that have been instituted by, particularly in the US, I think this is, are similar to the functional sequences that I mentioned earlier in this 1930s Technocracy Incorporated. You have the healthcare, Obamacare, then the Army Corps Engineers, that's the control over water. Then you have councils of governments, agricultural practices of the Bureau of Land. So different departments of government are similar to these functional sequences that I mentioned early on. But these are whether they're actually run technocratically. If they are, then obviously they're probably been created based on these concepts of the technocratic system. Even though all of these systems don't have to be definitely managed in such a way. Not long ago, all of these functions were under local or personal control within the context of traditional geographic boundaries such as cities, towns, and counties and states. A town, for instance, had a locally elected school board that set education policy for itself. Emergency management was managed by a fire board or a city council. But now they have national organizations that manage these things, so you no longer have a locally elected school board. You have this thing called, is it the Common Core, that's covering US education. And then you have FEMA, which is the emergency management structure nationally for the US, where in the past it was local fire boards or local emergency management structures. So it seems as they nationalize these structures, they become part of this technocratic system of running things in a more efficient way, which means some of these structures that they're setting up are not really considering the people in those societies. They're just looking at ways of better to make these processes more cheaper, or ways that they can bring in technology to manage these systems. For example, in the future, they're talking about having AI as teachers. Teachers are going to lose their jobs, basically. That's what, I think it was Bill Gates mentioned something about in the future, there'll be no teachers. Maybe in the next decade or so, there'll be no teachers. All of this will be done by AI and computers. So efficiency, in the technocratic sense, is not necessarily beneficial for people. In fact, it's not beneficial for people. It may seem the idea of making things more efficient may be beneficial to people, but in the long run, the way this technology is going, humans will be cut out of the process. Unless, of course, you're talking about now this what they call transhuman, where they're combining humans with technology. I don't know if that's a form of efficiency there. It hasn't been mentioned in these technocratic books, but I'm sure it's part of their thinking. Anyway, that's a look at this technocracy and its political structures. I think that's it for now.